November 5th, 1970, in front of 15,000 screaming fans at the Astrodome, a tiny girl with a quivering voice whispered a request no one expected. The crowd went dead silent. What happened next would etch Elvis Presley's compassion into history forever. The Astrodome shimmered. Under the harsh glare of stage lights, every inch vibrating with anticipation. 15,000 fans surged in unison, a living tide of voices, sweat, and excitement, pressing against the barriers near the stage. The scent of popcorn and leather mingled with the faint metallic temps of the arena's vast interior. Spotlights darted across the crowd, painting faces in sharp relief, every pair of eyes wide, every heart racing. Elvis Presley emerged, cape glinting, gold-studded jumpsuit catching each flicker of light. The king himself, stepping into a world that seemed to hold its breath for him. The band teased the first notes of Suspicious Minds, guitars and drums reverberating off concrete walls, the crowd swaying with anticipation. The atmosphere was electric, crackling with expectation and the collective thrill of thousands united by love for one man and his music. The roar was constant, unyielding, almost a physical presence, until faintly, almost imperceptibly, a quivering voice surfaced above the din. 8-year-old Sarah Whitman stood near the front row, clutching a folded piece of paper in her small hands. Her wide eyes, brimming with a mixture of awe and fear, searched the figure on stage. The crowd's roar seemed to recede into a muffled echo, as if the arena itself had leaned closer, waiting. Mid-script, reflective question. Have you ever felt invisible in a sea of people, only for one moment to make you seen? Security glanced toward her, whispers passing along the lines of ushers and stagehands. They exchanged glances, unsure how to handle the tiny figure whose voice had pierced the wall of sound. Somewhere backstage, Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana paused, hands hovering over strings and drums, sensing a shift in energy that had nothing to do with the setlist. The crowd, sensing something unusual, quieted imperceptibly. 1,000 murmurs threading through the air like a slow-moving wave. The tension was tangible, almost electric, pressing against the walls and seats of the Astrodome. Every fan leaned forward in expectation, the roar of moments ago now tempered into a hushed, almost reverent anticipation. This was not part of the show. This was something else entirely, something fragile and raw, and it demanded attention. For a heartbeat, the arena seemed to hold itself in suspension. All the lights, all the music, all the clamoring energy converged toward the small figure at the front, Sarah Whitman, the trembling girl whose quiet plea had paused a stadium. Who could have imagined that one tiny plea would silence 15,000 voices? 8-year-old Sarah Whitman's tiny fingers clutched a folded piece of paper, knuckles white with the effort of holding herself steady. Her heart thudded so hard she thought the king himself might hear it over the roar of 15,000 fans. She swallowed hard, her lips quivering as she tried to speak, her voice barely rising above the swell of applause and cheers. Around her, ushers and security glanced nervously, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment play out. A murmur passed through the front row, whispers like wind over dry leaves. From the stage, Elvis paused mid-song, a rare break in the performance that instantly drew every eye to him. His microphone lowered slightly, cape shifting as he leaned toward the sound of the fragile voice that had pierced the arena. The crowd, sensing the unusual interruption, went dead silent, a collective inhalation held as one. Even the band faltered, Scotty Moore's fingers hovering above the strings. DJ Fontana's sticks, poised but unmoving, waiting to see what would unfold. What would you do if a superstar suddenly looked right at you? Sarah's voice broke through again, quieter now than before, trembling like a leaf in a gust of wind. "Can I sing with you?" she whispered, barely audible, yet somehow the words traveled across the Astrodome, as if carried by the hush itself. The audience froze, the enormity of the request sinking into every corner of the arena. Some gasps rippled gently through the crowd. Others simply stared in stunned silence. Noise versus silence. Protocol versus empathy. The energy in the Astrodome shifted subtly but irreversibly. Security moved closer, uncertain whether intervention was required. Parents in the crowd clutched their children a little tighter. Camera flashes flickered, catching the glint of Elvis's eyes as he scanned the small figure before him. He smiled faintly, that familiar half-smile that had caused hearts to race across the world. But this time it carried an added weight, recognition, awareness, and curiosity. The king himself seemed to bend the rules of expectation. Whispers traveled along the aisles. Is he really going to stop for her? I can't believe she asked that. Look at his face. He's thinking about it. The tension rippled through the audience like a wave, a suspense that was simultaneously thrilling and nerve-wracking. Everyone felt it. The possibility that this ordinary child might do something extraordinary, simply by asking. Have you ever witnessed a moment when courage, however small, demanded attention from the world? Then, in a heartbeat that stretched like eternity, Elvis nodded. Not a perfunctory gesture, but a slow, deliberate acknowledgement that carried warmth, understanding, and openness. The arena seemed to exhale collectively. Security relaxed slightly. The band struck a tentative chord, sensing the tide had turned. In that fleeting instant, a stadium of 15,000 people became a single witness to an unexpected act of potential compassion. Then, Elvis does something no one expected. Elvis knelt down, lowering the microphone to meet Sarah Whitman's height. The gesture, simple yet profound, transformed the arena. 15,000 fans leaned forward instinctively, a collective hush falling over the Astrodome. Even the echo of footsteps and camera clicks seemed to vanish. Security froze, unsure whether protocol could permit this unscripted moment. Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana paused mid-note, sensing the subtle, electric shift in energy that had little to do with music. Sarah's lips trembled as she whispered, "Can I sing with you?" Her words, fragile yet clear, traveled across the expanse like ripples in still water. The crowd, accustomed to spectacle, now witnessed vulnerability, raw and human in its purest form. Gasps rose and fell like waves. Some fans cheered quietly, others held their breath, stunned into reverent silence. Noise and chaos had transformed into expectancy. Mid-script reflective question, when faced with unexpected opportunity, do we dare to take it? The stage lights caught the glint of Elvis's eyes, full of warmth and acknowledgement. He extended a hand toward Sarah, the iconic rings catching the glare of spotlights, each movement deliberate and reassuring. The audience noticed the quiet authority in his demeanor, a king bending the rules, prioritizing compassion over routine. Security officers exchanged subtle glances, tension mixing with admiration. In that pause, the tension stretched further than any song ever could, bridging performer and audience with a single act of humanity. Whispers passed from row to row, each ripple magnified in the cavernous space. He's actually letting her sing. Unbelievable. This is the real Elvis. Parents clutched children, friends grasped hands, strangers shared glances of recognition. In that moment, the Astrodome itself became a living witness, breathing with collective curiosity and hope. Noise versus silence. Authority versus empathy. Protocol versus human connection. The band, sensing a turning point, strummed a tentative chord. Elvis nodded, a subtle encouragement, signaling the stage was now Sarah's as much as his. For the first time, she felt seen. A tiny figure granted permission to step beyond the invisible barrier, separating ordinary from extraordinary. How often do we recognize moments when kindness requires courage from both sides? The tension was thick yet poised on the brink of resolution, every heartbeat amplified by the arena's charged silence. The crowd's attention focused entirely on Sarah, the small girl now standing on the precipice of memory and legend. Each face reflected anticipation, some leaning, some whispering, all acutely aware that they were about to witness an unscripted act of generosity. Elvis's calm patience, his iconic presence softened by empathy, had transformed the spectacle into something intimate, tender, and profoundly human. Pattern breaker, dead silent, 15,000 fans held their breath. In that frozen moment, the boundary between performer and spectator dissolved. A stadium full of voices, usually roaring and relentless, became a single organism holding space for one child's courage. And as Elvis's nod settled into the air, a quiet understanding passed among security, band members, and audience alike. The arena had collectively agreed to suspend disbelief, allowing compassion to dictate the night. With a gentle nod, Elvis opens the door to a moment that would echo for decades. Sarah Whitman took a deep breath, small hands gripping the folded paper, now tucked carefully into her pocket. The crowd's hush felt almost tangible, a living entity pressing forward yet holding back. Short bursts of sentences capture the rhythm. Elvis smiled. He extended his hand. The band struck a chord. Sarah sang, her voice, fragile at first, wove seamlessly with the Kings, trembling yet determined, a duet of innocence and legendary talent. The arena seemed to pause, every eye fixed on the improbable scene unfolding before them, the Astrodome. Moments ago, a sea of roaring anticipation had shifted into something intimate. Fans leaned over barriers, craning for a glimpse, yet respecting the fragile magic. Each note Sarah sang hung in the air, accompanied by the soft strum of Scotty Moore's guitar and the gentle taps of DJ Fontana's drums, the music amplifying the emotional weight of the moment. The lights reflected off Elvis's jumpsuit, sparkling like a constellation guiding the girl through the unknown territory of courage. Mid-script reflective question: have you ever witnessed kindness that changes the energy of an entire room? Shortly, applause began to ripple tentatively through the crowd, like waves lapping at a still shore. Hesitant at first, then building. Fans clapped, some standing, some cheering softly, unsure if they were witnessing a performance or a miracle. The tension that had gripped the arena dissolved into shared joy, empathy mingling with awe. Sarah's voice grew steadier, emboldened by the King's gentle guidance and the collective support of thousands. Noise versus silence, fear versus courage, all converging in perfect harmony. Elvis stepped back slightly, letting her shine, giving the moment space to breathe. He whispered encouragement, subtle enough for her to hear, intimate enough for the audience to sense. The microphone captured the tremor in her voice, her notes blending seamlessly with the smooth timbre of his legendary vocals. Every fan present felt the weight of the moment, a rare confluence of vulnerability and brilliance. She whispered over the roar, and the king paused mid-song. The crowd began waving scarves, some handmade signs flickering in the arena lights. Elvis cares, bravo Sarah. Magic tonight. The communal energy grew, swelling around the small stage. The Astrodome itself seemed to breathe with the rhythm of shared humanity. The transformation was more than music. It was collective recognition that greatness sometimes resides in the courage to lift others. Even in front of 15,000 eyes, as the final notes lingered, silence reclaimed the space for a heartbeat, the quiet amplified by the magnitude of what had just occurred. Then came the swell, a roar of applause, tears in eyes, voices calling her name, acknowledging her courage and the king's kindness. It was catharsis in its purest form, a union of performer, child, and audience. By the final note, no one in that arena would ever forget this moment. The applause rolled through the Astrodome like a living wave, sweeping over 15,000 fans who were no longer mere spectators, but active participants in a shared moment of humanity. Sarah Whitman stood at the center of the stage, her small figure framed by Elvis Presley's guiding presence. His hand lingered near hers, a silent anchor of reassurance. Yet he let her step into the spotlight, giving the night entirely to her courage. Around them, the arena transformed, barriers faded in importance. Strangers leaned toward one another, and collective joy replaced the roar that had dominated the early evening. Fans began waving scarves, homemade banners catching the stage lights, messages like Elvis cares and bravo Sarah fluttering in the sea of hands. The collective energy shifted from anticipation to admiration, a shared heartbeat that seemed to pulse through the stadium's concrete ribs. Security relaxed, exchanging smiles and subtle nods. Ushers allowed themselves a momentary glance of awe, marveling at the unplanned unfolding of compassion and courage. Every corner of the Astrodome, from the front row to the highest balcony, felt united in recognition that something extraordinary was occurring. Backstage, Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana exchanged glances, quietly acknowledging that what had just happened transcended rehearsal and performance. Their instruments had accompanied a moment of pure empathy, music amplifying vulnerability and courage in perfect harmony. Elvis himself stepped back slightly, letting Sarah take the lead, his eyes shining under the stage lights, rings glinting, cape shifting softly, as if even the king understood that this moment belonged to a little girl and the community that had held space for her. Sarah's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Whitman, were ushered forward, tears glinting in their eyes, smiles trembling as they watched their daughter shine. In that instant, the boundaries between family, performer, and audience dissolved. The Astrodome was not just a stage anymore. It had become a living monument to human kindness and shared experience. What small gestures have you received that made you feel monumental? Elvis, with a subtle flourish, presented Sarah with his signature cap, placing it gently in her hands. The gesture was simple, yet its weight was immeasurable. A tangible token, a memory crystallized, a reminder that courage and vulnerability could command attention even in front of thousands. Fans gasped softly, some cheering quietly, honoring both the king's generosity and the girl's bravery. The cap became a symbol, an artifact, bridging legend and humanity, performance and reality. Pattern breaker. Elvis handed her his cap, a small gesture infinite weight. The ripple effect began immediately. Fans began exchanging smiles, some standing to applaud her once more, others leaning toward strangers to share whispered words of admiration. Bootleg signs waved, clapping synchronized in rhythm with the lingering music. The arena hummed with an energy distinct from the opening frenzy. It was the warmth of community, an acknowledgement that greatness is measured not just in performance, but in the ability to uplift others. Even backstage staff, typically invisible, were caught in the current. Ushers and technicians nodded to one another, aware they had witnessed something rare and unrepeatable. The band played softly again, almost instinctively, a gentle underscore to the collective joy and transformation that had overtaken the audience. Sarah's small, trembling voice had opened a door to connection that no one had anticipated, yet everyone felt compelled to honor. By the end of the night, the Astrodome was no longer simply a venue. It had been transformed into a sanctuary of shared recognition and collective compassion. The audience, the performers, the child, her family, even the staff, all had become part of a single, luminous memory by the end. The Astrodome isn't just a venue, it's a living monument to kindness. The following day, Houston awoke to headlines that would be remembered for decades. Elvis and the Little Girl, Houston Astrodome Magic, newspapers, glossy magazines, and local radio carried the story of a tiny girl who dared to ask for a moment on stage, and of a legendary performer who chose compassion over routine. Sarah Whitman's trembling request and Elvis's unexpected kindness became the narrative of the week, capturing hearts far beyond the 15,000 fans who had witnessed it. Firsthand, Sarah's parents framed the folded note she had clutched so tightly, placing it beside her signature cap, now a relic of courage, a tangible memory of a night when vulnerability met generosity. Bootleg recordings circulated among fans, capturing the quivering duet for those unable to attend. Every replay, every whisper about the event added to its legendary status. Even the band members, Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana, recounted the moment with reverence, remembering the hush that had overtaken the arena, the way Elvis had knelt, and the small voice that had commanded attention in front of thousands. Mid-script, reflective question: can a single act of kindness shape a lifetime? The story spread like wildfire. Fans wrote letters to Elvis, recounting their personal feelings about the night and how it had inspired them to act with empathy in their own lives. Children and parents alike recounted Sarah's courage, and the King's choice to amplify it became a template for legendary generosity. Some attendees returned year after year, bringing scarves or banners in homage, sharing the story with new generations, ensuring the memory remained alive. The ripple extended beyond fans. Other performers noted the story, inspired to allow moments of vulnerability on their stages, creating an unspoken culture of compassion within the music community. Foundations dedicated to children's arts programs cited the Astrodome event as an inspiration, emphasizing that a single act of acknowledgement and encouragement could change trajectories. Sarah herself grew up understanding that her courage, combined with kindness received, held power beyond imagination. The Astrodome, once just a venue, became a symbol of possibility. Plaques and photographs commemorated the night. Houston Astrodome, November 5, 1970, -15,000 fans bore witness to something extraordinary, one read. Another headline captured it succinctly: Elvis and the Little Girl, legendary compassion. Objects such as Sarah's framed cap and note Bootleg recordings and faded newspaper clippings became artifacts for future generations, ensuring that the memory was preserved not just in hearts, but in physical form, even decades later. The tales circulated among fans, journalists, and historians, reminding all that moments of true empathy are rare but transformative. Conversations in family living rooms, documentaries, and fan forums repeatedly revisited the night, reinforcing that a superstar's greatness is measured not solely by talent, but by the courage to uplift others in unexpected ways. How often do we underestimate the power of small acts to create lasting ripples? The impact was subtle yet profound. Every donation, every new fan initiative, every shared memory of kindness linked back to the Astrodome moment. Sarah's story and Elvis's response became a legend, not merely because of celebrity, but because of human connection, empathy, and the courage to act. Pattern breaker. Even now, 50 years later, people whisper about that night. What did it teach us about humanity? From newspapers to personal recollections, from backstage anecdotes to charitable foundations, the night's echoes persisted, reminding every generation that greatness is inseparable from compassion. The story transcended the performance, creating a legacy of shared humanity that would ripple infinitely outward, forever marked by the small, trembling request of one little girl and the giant-hearted response of a king. Mini cliffhanger, even now. 50 years later, people whisper about that night. What did it teach us about humanity? The moral of Sarah Whitman's trembling request in Houston 1970 is simple yet profound. True greatness is measured not by applause or fame, but by the courage to show empathy even in front of 15,000 eyes. The Astrodome, once a cavern of lights, music, and anticipation, had transformed into a living classroom for kindness. The hush that fell, the glint of Elvis's gold-studded jumpsuit, and the soft strings underscoring a child's voice all became enduring reminders of what it means to act with humanity. Reflecting on that night, one realizes the subtle interplay between courage and generosity. Sarah's bravery, small yet luminous, demanded recognition. Elvis's response, legendary yet tender, met that courage with dignity and attention. The arena became more than a venue. It became a conduit for shared human experience. Every fan present, every band member, every usher and security guard became part of a collective acknowledgement that compassion could override routine, fear, and protocol. When do we choose compassion over convenience? The night's sensory memory lingers, the hush that pressed against concrete walls, the glinting gold of a jumpsuit that had become a beacon, the soft strum of guitar strings accompanying a fragile voice, the collective breath of thousands held in reverence. It was not simply a performance. It was an awakening, a gentle but unyielding reminder that moments of attention, presence, and care ripple far beyond the stage. Each artifact, Sarah's cap, the folded note, bootleg recordings, and newspaper clippings became tangible proof that even small gestures can leave indelible marks on hearts and minds. Over the years, the story grew in significance. Fans would retell it, teachers would use it as an example of courage met with kindness, and historians noted it as one of Elvis Presley's defining acts of empathy. It was a quiet yet enduring lesson that empathy and attention, even in fleeting moments, can transform ordinary interactions into legendary experiences. It reminded everyone that acts of generosity and recognition are amplified when performed in the presence of many. inspiring others to follow suit. As the Astrodome emptied and the echoes of applause faded, the resonance of that night persisted in the hearts of all who witnessed it. Sarah Whitman would grow up cherishing the memory, the cap, and the understanding that her courage mattered. Elvis Presley's legacy, already monumental, was enhanced by his willingness to bend expectation, to let humanity take center stage. Mid-script reflective question: how can we, in our daily lives, recognize courage and meet it with kindness? The tremble of one small voice became a defining moment, not merely for the child, but for a community, a fan base, and a generation of witnesses. And that is why one trembling request in Houston, 1970, remains unforgettable. In the end, it is a lesson that greatness and compassion are inseparable, that attentiveness to the small moments can produce ripples far beyond the stage, and that acts of care, no matter how brief, echo through time. And that's why one trembling request in Houston, 1970, remains unforgettable. Moments of kindness echo far beyond the stage. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that courage and compassion, even in the smallest voices, can change lives forever. Were you there in spirit with Elvis and Sarah? Let the ripple continue.